and Don is a manager of grants and communications at Saskatoon Community Foundation. Go ahead, Don.
Hey, Vendasta. Is this live? Are we on? Okay, good. So I understand the theme for today is workplace health, and to be honest, when Nakia invited me to speak about vital signs, I was sort of pawing through it to figure out what we could say about that. But before I start, I actually wanted to backtrack for 1 second and just say on the theme of Alan's earlier presentation, recently saw, maybe a couple of years ago, an interesting segment on the news about local writer Art Slade. And his stand-up desk is built on top of his treadmill. So he's walking and writing all day. Probably a step up from standing and writing. Something to consider. I don't know that I could do that, but see how it goes. Anyway, if you want to just, I can advance this, right. So as Alan said, I'm Grants and Communications Manager at the Saskatoon Community Foundation, and you've got to know when you invite a charity here, you're going to get a quickie overview. I mean, I have to tell you about my charity. It's my job. So just really, really quick, what we do at the Community Foundation, we break down into 3 major components. 1, we build endowment funds to support local charities. 2, we grant strategically to support charities in the community. And 3rd, and probably the most nebulous category, community leadership. Because what is community leadership? How do you lead a community? Where is a community going, and how do you get it to go there? Complicated stuff, because we're multi-directional, there are so many facets. And so Vital Signs is actually a program of Community Foundations of Canada that is an attempt to try and help us get together to address this kind of thing. Anyway, just really quickly, in 2014, SCF made over 450 grants to over 200 local charities. And thanks to innovative community partnerships, we granted for the first time ever over $5 million. When I came to the foundation in 2008, our dream was to one day grant $1 million. Now, part of the $5 million is that we're helping the Friends of the Bowl campaign, and there were some big donations there, but we are actually granting regularly now over $2 million every year into the community. So like I said, it's my job to tell you that. If you want to know more about the Community Foundation, come talk to me, give me a call. I'm reachable. All right. Community leadership, as I said, it's the more difficult thing to define. If you're trying to raise funds, you know how you succeeded. You raised some funds. If you're trying to make grants, you know how you succeeded. You gave the money out and a good project happened. Some of the things that we do for community leadership are Vital Signs, new this year. We encourage youth philanthropy by working with a youth advisory council that grants out on $1 million fund. So they grant around $40,000 every year to youth projects. And I work with the youth and help them understand, how to read financial statements, that kind of stuff. We have a little binder called the Just In Case, which is about being prepared for things that most of the Vendasta staff are probably not ready to think about. But so it's more than just estate planning. It's, will people know your computer password? Will they know where your garage door clicker is? If you died suddenly today, would the people who are handling your estate know who to invite to your funeral or what you would want said about yourself? So it's kind of a comprehensive guide to planning for the end of life. Like I said, something we all need to think about at some point. We also give advice on wills. About 60% of Canadians die without a will. And when that happens, the government decides where your estate goes, not you, not your family. So, and we participate in lots of communities and other, community organizations, committees, and other initiatives in the community. So, on to Vital Signs. Community Foundations of Canada is our national organization, and one of their core slogans is about the relationship between every individual in the community. Your community makes you, it shapes you. It gives you the education, it gives you the start, it gives you the opportunity to work for a company like Vendasta. And let's face it, the community is also part of what gave the founders of Vendasta the opportunity to get together and to come up with their great ideas and create all this revenue and employment and success. So great. You also make your community by being a part of it. So the question is, how are you going to go about doing that? So what is Vital Signs? Just as the name implies, Vital Signs is It's a collation of community statistics that are like a vital signs chart. How are you doing right now? What's your blood pressure? What's your heart rate? Well, what are the vital signs for a community? We have 10 focus areas in our vital signs report, and I'm sure I won't be able to remember them all to list them in order, but gap between rich and poor, health, housing, work, safety, arts and culture, belonging and leadership. Somebody shout out if they remember what another one is. Doesn't really matter. You get the idea. By the way, I have paper copies of the report back by the AV desk there. Help yourselves. I didn't know if it would be bad manners to bring paper copies to an IT company, but yeah, we still print paper. Anyway, we want to track and analyze significant issues about community health, right? So, like I said, some of those things, there's a national report, and then each community foundation that participates produces its local report. We also, though, really want that data to be reader-friendly. In point of fact, there's very, very little new research inside of this vital signs report. Most of it comes from StatsCan. It's available from QSAR, Community University Institute on Social Research. I have these thick, hard-to-read, data-heavy research reports on my desk, and I'm paid a decent wage to read all that stuff. But the average person doesn't want to wade through that stuff. I mean, when was the last time anybody here looked through a thick paper report to find any information? When was the last time anybody here looked inside a phone book, as opposed to just going to 411.ca or something like that? So we wanted to make this reader-friendly in order to use the data to generate discussions, right? So coming back to that original idea, where's a community going? How do we know where it should go? And how do we get together to decide what we're going to do about that and move it one step toward some kind of a goal? Well, part of that is simplifying the conversation and making it something that we can all participate in on kind of a level playing field. So we want to also, hopefully, in the future, inform policy change, focus community leadership activities, so get groups together to work on some of these issues, and also to encourage philanthropy, because that's how we serve the community. It's certainly not the only model for serving a community, but it's a worthwhile one that does a lot of good. So the challenge here is I've got 20 minutes, actually less than 20 now, and I have to tell you everything about how our community works and then what you should do about it. So that probably won't work out for me. I told Nakia that I could go on for an hour or so without even taking a pause, but she said no, 20 minutes is how we do it here. So what I thought I would do is talk about a few examples of how people might look at the data, how they might use it. Some of the stuff in this presentation doesn't necessarily lead to a right conclusion, but it's a discussion that can be had. Is this appropriate? Does correlation equal causation? I don't know. So I thought I would start with the theme for Community Foundations of Canada's National Vital Signs Report. The theme is belonging. And so this is a page out of our report. A strong sense of belonging is central to Saskatoon's vitality. Okay, so let's look at a couple of infographics out of the report. By the way, I didn't have time to request all the graphics directly from our agency, so I just cut and pasted them out of the report, so they might look a little blurry, I'm not sure. Anyway, we're doing pretty well economically. Even despite the slump across the country, we're still doing quite well economically. So the average wage in Saskatoon is $16.51 an hour, as opposed to $14.28 across Canada on average, and $13.75 in Manitoba. As you look through the report, you'll find that the comparisons we make were chosen based on sort of what seemed logical to us. So when we look at transit, we didn't really compare ourselves to Toronto or Vancouver, but we thought Winnipeg and Regina would be a good way to compare where our city's at, We've got strong employment growth, right? It's 0.4% over the last year for Canada, 3% here in Saskatoon. That's pretty awesome. I mean, who can do math? That's like 8 times the growth compared to Canada. I'm just going to flick through a couple of these things. I'll come to the point eventually, I promise. So can we see all this stuff from the audience? Can you read any of that stuff? So we've got higher median earnings than the rest of the country. We've got higher employment rate and lower unemployment rate than the rest of the country. Things seem to be going pretty well. Now remember, I started out with belonging as the theme for the national report. So actually here in Saskatoon, we're doing pretty well. Across Canada, Canadians say, 64% of Canadians say that they have a strong shared sense of community belonging and sort of cultural inclusiveness, okay? In Saskatchewan, it's close to 75, and here in Saskatoon, it's 73%. So we're 9 points over the national average. And I think, how many people here in the room have lived in Saskatoon for 10 years or longer? Really, it's actually not. Maybe half, I would say, from just a quick scan. So, but those who've been here for a while know that we have a strong sense of identity as Saskatoonians. We have a strong sense of what the town was, and you know, if you say the Bay to me, I'm still really thinking, you know, where the old Bay used to be. Things like that, you know, it's that sense of history. Okay, so we were talking about workplaces. I know it seems like I'm going from one thing to another and not making any sense. That's just how I talk. Okay, so migration. We notice that this is, by the way, not a 2001 to 2014 statistic. This is one calendar year, 2013 to 2014. 5,355 newcomers from other countries have come to Saskatoon. So here's the question, and here's a conversation that can arise out of that. We know that we have a strong economy, and that's going to make for healthy workplaces to a certain extent. We know that we have a strong sense of belonging and inclusion in our community. But when we have 5,000 new people a year right now coming from other countries, some of whom don't speak our language, many of whom will not be familiar with our diet, our cultural customs, Halloween, for example. Sometimes I wonder how weird Halloween seems to people who've never experienced it before. You know, how will we go about maintaining that high sense of belonging and inclusion? Because a healthy workplace is one thing, but we all interact with our community, not only in the workplace, with the partners we have in business, the colleagues we have in the work we do, but in the whole rest of our life. So how are we going to maintain that high sense of inclusion? I asked a group of grades 6, 7s, and 8s this question last week when I was talking to them, and they said, maybe make friends with people. It didn't seem like a bad idea. In terms of the Community Foundation, we support lots of programs at charities that can help. Things like ESL programs that happen on off work hours so that a person can work and earn a living, because you have to earn a living to have a good quality of life, but then you can go in the evenings and learn how to speak better English so that you can communicate with your coworkers and feel more a part of things. You know, in my case, my coworkers who are sitting back over there could tell you, I filter the world substantially through jokes and sarcasm and irony. And someone who's in English as a second language speaker might not get me on certain days at all. So being able to speak the language is really important to doing well in the community and doing well in the culture. Just one example. Okay, I'm going to move on from this because I see time is running out and I do want to leave you time for questions. It's also possible to put things together from the report that might lead to spurious conclusions, right? When I made this report, I never envisioned that I would be putting these two graphics next to each other on a slide. So I have no idea if there is a correlation. You'll see that Saskatoon has, on the right-hand side there, has a higher incidence of work absences than the rest of the country. And you'll also see on the left-hand side that 61% of us aren't getting the fruits and veggies we need as per the Canada Food Guide. So is it because we're less healthy that we're sick more frequently and therefore absent from work? Well, we actually don't, by the way, in this report have a comparative stat on fruits and vegetables for the rest of the country. So I don't know if there's even correlation or whether the one thing causes the other. But if we have a conversation about that and we talk about what we can do about either of those things, we're still talking about steps we can take to make a better community. So I have no idea if those things would really be connected. But it's all there to generate discussion. Actually, that's more what happened to us. Can we get that back? There we are. Here's another one. Interesting to me. So the median multiple housing affordability index has gone up significantly in the last 10 years. 2005, it was within what they call the affordable range. If you have to spend 3 times your annual income to buy a house, that's considered affordable. We're now in the red there, 5 times or thereabouts, not as affordable. On the other side, you have the most up-to-date piece of data we have in the whole report, the QSAR homeless count from June of this year. 450 people, including 45 children, are homeless here in Saskatoon. It would be tempting to draw a connection between those things. Does anybody think there is a connection between house prices and homelessness? Go ahead. Do you want the football? I'm dying to toss that thing. It could be true, but people who are homeless are not looking to buy a home. Right? There are many stages in between. But if you can't afford to buy a home because it's too expensive, then you're probably going to rent one of the places that somebody who then would probably have to rent a 2-bedroom apartment or something like that, which means that somebody who would previously been trying to rent that apartment will have to move. And it probably does trade down the scale, and it has an impact. Whether or not that's true, the data's there to generate conversation. Ultimately, I think that there are a lot of things that we can do, and I want to come back to a basic tenet of charity. Winston Churchill, a famous curmudgeonly fella, but who had a lot of wisdom, said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life from what we give. So everybody's got to make a living, everybody's got to earn some money, buy some food, shelter, toilet paper, and whatnot. I'll just leave the whatnot up to you. But really, when we focus only on ourselves, we don't make our own lives better, right? Because if you focus on yourself all the time, you tend to focus on what's wrong with your life. You tend to focus on other people, you tend to feel better about your own life. Any fans of Simon Sinek here in the room? You know who that is? I know you are, Christy, thank you. She actually loaned me the book. But so Simon Sinek is Start From Why. Does that phrase ring a bell? It's about the whole philosophy of how businesses work. But anyway, one of the principles in Simon Sinek's writing is that when we all feel safe, when we all feel supported by our colleagues, when we all feel that there's enough to go around, we tend to take care of each other. We tend to have each other's backs. When we feel pressured, when we feel threatened, when we feel that there isn't enough to go around, we tend to look to ourselves only and let the other people take care of themselves. So that's really a perceptual thing. But we know, factually speaking, that people in Saskatoon buy into this, at least in terms of how they support charities. Across Canada, the average Canadian gives $280 annually to charity. In Saskatchewan, much higher, $380 annually. And here in Saskatoon, 50% more than most Canadians on average, $410. So that's an endorsement of the idea that Saskatoon people do, in fact, look out for each other. And I think that's one of the reasons we have that high sense of community belonging. So here's where I want to leave you with, I notice I'm almost out of time on my countdown clock. I don't know if there's a hook over there that I'm going to get yanked with, but what are you going to do about it? Okay? What's the mark that you're going to leave on this community? I'm sure we all want to leave a mark with the work that we do, but is that it? Is that where it stops? Do you have some other mark you want to leave? Will the world be a better place because you were here? When you're gone, what's your legacy going to be? So those are important questions. I'd be happy to entertain any of your questions now.
Hi, it was an interesting end to your talk there, because I think that one thing I've always been told is that you do things for 3 reasons: for money, for a name, or to make a difference. And I'm in my 40s, and when I grew up, you made money, hoping to make a name, and then you made a difference. And I feel like now a lot of younger people start off with making a difference, then get a name, and then they go for money. So do you think that's a positive thing, or do you think that that's not?
I think it's a bit of I'm not sure I accept the premise that you do one thing, then you do the next thing, then you do the next thing. I think that you can build a profession, make money, and make a difference all at the same time, or at different times. You know, it's not as though the years between 20 and 30 were spent making a name for myself, and then I stopped making a name for myself and went on to making money. So I'll just give one really quick example. Originally, the Youth Advisory Council had an age range of 14 to 20. We changed that to 13 to 20 because a 13-year-old wanted to get into the group. This young woman became a volunteer for Free the Children. And I helped with some of the details, but I'm not going to take one shred more of the credit than I'm due, which is that I was a bit of a mentor and helped her get started on a couple of the details of how to run an event. By the time she was 17 years old, she had run about 15 different events, from musical events to dinners and auctions, and she had raised over $75,000 to build a school in Africa for Free the Children. She's not waiting around till she's got a name and made money before she makes a difference. And Free the Children's slogan, I love, by the way, is "Be the Change." So yeah, I think that you can do all three at once. I know that some of you can do serious work and also play video games at the same time, correct? Well, multitasking. Anybody else? Sorry for breathing so hard in the mic there.
Is this the first issue of Vital Signs?
Yes, Vital Signs has existed since 2001. It began in Toronto, and we've been trying for a number of years to basically find the budget to do it here. It's not an inexpensive program because we printed over 100,000 copies of this report and distributed it through the Star Phoenix. Many of you may have seen it before you came in the room today. So we hope that the interest is going to be significant, and we're going to keep doing it in the future because, of course, this is just a benchmark. It's a starting point. In future reports, you'll see how these numbers are changing. Is that sense of community belonging going to erode over time as we get more and more new people from different cultures who don't feel they belong the same way that us sort of old Saskatoonians do? Or are we going to do something about that?
You mentioned dialogue and conversation is one of the reasons that one of the outcomes you want. Was there a main outcome that you wanted to gain for this? What was the desired outcome, and how are you gauging it?
I would say we have a few outcomes that we're interested in, but the main one is to generate awareness of the issues and generate conversation about the issues. And so we'll see how that goes. I think that the media coverage we've gotten has been very encouraging. There's been a lot of interest. As I said a few minutes ago, I've spoken to a couple of school groups already. I've been invited into a place where probably I've never spoken to most of the people in this room before. And we're only a few weeks in. It was launched October 6th, so we'll have to see in a few months. By the way, I didn't make a big deal of it when I switched to the last slide, but we do want to know what you think. So look us up on Facebook and tell us what you think of the report. Tell us what you think should be in there. What's missing for you? When we were doing the report, we cut a whole bunch of data points because we wanted to make sure that what we did present was easy to look at and easy to talk about. But if you think there's something missing, or aspects, or even a whole focus area that's important to our community, we want to know, how does this get better? You know, if Dawn, standing in front of you now, is the person who's generating all this, how interesting is that? Extremely interesting is the answer, but it becomes even more interesting if all of you get involved.
Just very quickly, you noted that Saskatchewan is #1 in charity giving per capita. We're also #1 in exports per capita. We're also #1 in GDP per capita. Do you see a correlation between economic prosperity and what we give?
I would say that I've been in the charitable sector for a little bit more than 20 years now, and I've worked for arts organizations, health organizations, a bunch of different kinds of charities, and of course my time with the Community Foundation brings me in contact with many more. And I would say that the recent period, starting in the late 90s, but really in the aughts, of economic prosperity has probably led to higher rates of dollar giving, and also some new wealthy class that has been able to donate generously to charities, including ours. But as far as personal volunteering, connection to the community, I think that's always been there.
And I'm not sure if you guys are Patriot fans, but this football seems a little deflated. I'm just saying.
We're basically cause neutral, and so we don't favor one sports franchise over another. I know there was a long time kind of Habs Leafs thing going in the office, but with the introduction of our new executive director, who will be starting December 1st, who's Carm Michelenko in the Batgirl costume in the back there. I've had a couple of meetings with Carm, but she hasn't declared a sports affiliation so far.
All right, thank you very much, Don.
Thanks for inviting me.